The Free Library of Philadelphia is proud to present a podcast from our award-winning Author Events series, recorded live at the Parkway Central Library on the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. To learn more about the Free Library, our unique and inspiring collections, and how your contribution can help our programs and services for the community, please visit freelibrary.org.
I'm Tahia Bikalo, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. 2 years ago, I was sitting here in the audience at the library, attending Dr. Ramadan's lecture, extremely excited to be in the same room with one of the most prolific and influential intellectuals of our time. This time I was invited to introduce Dr. Ramadan, and it is a great honor and pleasure to have him with us today to speak about his latest book called Islam and the Arab Awakening. It might sound cliché, but Dr. Ramadan is a person that indeed needs no introduction. In addition to being an exceptional thinker and a prolific writer, Dr. Ramadan is a fervent activist, passionate about the issues relating to the place of Islam and Muslims in modern and multicultural world. Dr. Ramadan does not stop at just analyzing and offering opinions. He is motivating young people, intelligentsia, and interfaith groups to take actions that will not only build bridges between cultures and faiths, but also redefine and change the concepts that divide them. Even his biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, titled In the Footsteps of the Prophet, it had to be more than just a biography. It had to contain advice how to apply positive principles established by the Prophet to the modern world. Dr. Ramadan is no stranger to controversies and harsh criticisms. He was denied, as many of you know, he was denied a visa to enter the U.S., even though he was offered a position of a professor at a prestigious university. The city of Rotterdam and Erasmus University dismissed him from his position of a professor for political reasons. A French journalist and a writer wrote a book about Dr. Ramadan, accusing him of so-called doublespeak. So in 2010, Dr. Ramadan writes a book, What I Believe, in which he speaks clearly and from his heart. And in that book he says, I am determined to go ahead without wasting my time over such strategic diversions and remain faithful to my vision, my principles, and my project. I mean to build bridges between two universes of reference, between highly debatable constructions termed Western and Islamic, and between citizens within Western societies themselves. My aim is to show that one can be both, fully Muslim and Western, and that we share many common principles. So whether you subscribed to his theories and opinions or not is irrelevant. You will not remain indifferent after hearing or reading them. Dr. Ramadan makes us think, move, and respond. His work makes us understand the complexities of the world we live in and inspires us to work on improving our global society. Today, Dr. Ramadan will discuss his latest book that looks into the series of uprisings in the Middle East and North Africa that we all witnessed with great emotion last year. Today, a year later, the transitions are not finished and we have yet to see the more permanent outcomes. Dr. Ramadan and his book provide deeper insight in a week where we all are looking for insight. And once again, he provides suggestions how this process can be supported for the benefit of us all. Dr. Ramadan, thank you for being here today, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Tariq Ramadhan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very kind introduction and for being here today. Thank you as well to come at 12 o'clock in the morning to attend a talk and a discussion around a complex issue when it comes to the Arab awakening and the Arab uprisings and what is happening or has happened, still happening, and is going to happen, the vision that we can have about the Middle East and the North African countries. And it's true that over the last 25 years have been trying on three main fields. The first is really to rethink our relationship with the Islamic principles and to advocate not to reform Islam, but to reform the Muslim minds and to reform our understanding of the challenges ahead. This is one field, which is the legacy, the Islamic sciences. The other field is the one that you refer to, which has to do with Western Muslims and in which way they have to deal with the new context. And the last one is the one on which I focused in the last book in Muslim majority countries, in the Middle East, in Asia, and of course for the last book in MENA, in the Middle East and North Africa. I will try to focus and to stick to my half an hour, maybe 25 minutes, just to give you time to comment and discuss, because I think that this is where we need a debate. Let me start by inductively start with what happened the last days in Egypt, in Libya, in now Yemen, in Pakistan, and it's spreading around these demonstrations against the film, the movie, and then now very much against the United States of America. And I think that we need to take a clear stand and to say something 11 years after September 11 and just now as we are experiencing. Without a condition, and with no justification to anything, we have to say to kill ambassadors, to attack embassies, has to be condemned. And it's not only disputable from an Islamic viewpoint, it's anti-Islamic. This is not the way we deal with our principles. And we have to be clear, starting with this, by saying we will see why I'm saying this now, because in fact is one of the challenges that I'm mentioning at the end of the book. One challenge which has to do with these interpretations of our religion that we have. There is one Islam, many interpretations. Some interpretations are conservative, literalist, that's fine. But if we go beyond this, and in the name of some interpretations we do things that are contrary to the fundamentals and the principles, we are beyond the accepted diversity. And it's high time for the Muslims to engage in this critical debate. I'm writing articles every week on my website, and the last article that I'm finishing now will very much tackle this issue of the challenge of diversity. Because we need to be courageous. It's very easy to sit down and say, I agree with pluralism and diversity, but it takes courage to be consistent and demanding in how do we deal with diversity, not to be silent when some people are doing things and only visible when it's easy to be a pluralist. Even us in the West, and you, the people here who are Muslims or people of other faiths, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, agnostics. If we are serious about pluralism, we also have to be quite clear that it's demanding. There are limits in what we should accept sometimes in the way our rights are used. I'm against, what I heard. I had just a TV program on CNN, and I heard Brzezinski saying that we might think about preventing people from expressing themselves in the way they did with the movie. This wouldn't be my answer. I think we should not prevent the people from speaking. Sometimes what is right is to ignore the way they express themselves. But we should be all clear that if we are serious about pluralism, we should never let people use the rights that we are cherishing to promote hatred, racism, and bigotry. and to tell them, you will find us, because we are committed citizens. It's too much a price to pay to let you do this, because at the end, the victims are not only the people that you are targeting. The victims are all of us. It's undermining the principles of democracy. So we are not going to prevent you from speaking, but if you speak and promote hatred, you will find us. We'll stand up against you and saying, this is not decent, this is not dignified, this is against our values. And this has to be said everywhere. So as much as I am clear on the position that we have to take with Muslims today and some of these trends that are a tiny minority, I think that all of us in the West, we should stand up and to say to these people, we are not going to prevent you from speaking, but we will be there if you go too far by resisting and saying what should be said to the way you nurtured hatred within our society. Pluralism is very demanding. True pluralism is demanding. And as I'm saying this, in between what happened 11 years ago and what is happening now, we had in the Middle East movements, millions of people, thousands of people taking into the street and being clear in non-violent way that they don't want dictatorship, they don't want corruption, they want justice, dignity and freedom. These are the people who are expressing the majority views of the Muslim. And we should be very clear that the tiny minority that are making the headlines today are not representing the silent majority of people who non-violently were against the dictators. Let us just remember this between events, that the crises are distorting our vision of the other. And this is exactly what they want. The literalists, violent extremists, they want you to perceive that Islam is a problem because it nurtured their emotional politics. And some of the people in the United States who are able to say Islam is a cancer, they want exactly this, for us to portray Islam and the Muslims in such a way. So these extremes are nurturing each other, and we are in a vicious circle. It is not possible for us to be spectators of that. We have to be committed to our principles and to work together against the two extremes, because at the end we are going to be caught in it. So what is important is to look at what happened in the Muslim majority countries, where people took into the street asking for freedom, and to try to understand what happened. In the book, I went very far in trying to study what we knew before, what happened, and what we can hope out of it. And the starting point was terminology. And if you follow all my work over the last 30 years, you will see that I'm always starting by defining the concepts that I'm using. Because words matter and definitions are power. The way you define the word, it's where you can decide this word means this, and who is deciding the definition. And we have to be very clear on the fact that the way you describe things is the way you perceive them and the power you can have over them. So when the people were very, very quick to say, oh, the Arab Spring, following in what happened in Eastern Europe, and saying this is the European Spring because we had in Poland, in Hungary, all these movements, and in Serbia, all this movement, this is spring and this is the true democratization, and we were talking about revolutions. From the very beginning I said, I don't call them revolutions, and I'm not yet sure it's the spring. And I used the concept of awakening for two reasons that I want to explain. First, revolution now, I started by saying I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm cautious. And when you see what is happening now, we have reasons to be cautious about what could happen out of the whole process. And cautiously optimistic because this narrative or rational that was sold at the very beginning, it came from the people. Muhammad Bouazizi self-immolated himself, and it went all of a sudden. All this is wrong. If you come back to facts and figures, you understand that the people who were pushing towards democratization were from within and from abroad. And we have to study this. When George W. Bush said in 2003 we are going towards democratization in the Middle East, and he was explaining what they were doing in Iraq by going to kill innocent people and to tell us a lie about the weapon of mass destruction, which at the end of the day we have to you are sitting at the United Nations saying there are weapons of mass destruction, and we say it's a lie, but the consequence of this lie is hundreds of thousands of people are being killed. This is the reality of it. These are facts. And we were getting the message that a process of democratization was to be promoted in the Middle East. He was right, and we didn't take him seriously because it was coming from Bush. But at the end, the Bush administration, and up to the President Barack Obama was pushing in this direction. And now we know that we have cyber dissidents and bloggers that were trained in the West in a way which is non-violent demonstrations to be pushed. It doesn't mean that the West controlled the whole thing. That's not true. There were the ingredients for the people to mobilize and to act were there. Poverty, corruption, unemployment, all was there. And this was the truth in Egypt and in Tunisia. But the fact that we were using social networks, the fact that this was a philosophy, and if you go, because we haven't studied, the problem is that we don't study history. One of our main problems with the present is that we don't have the memory of the past. We don't come back to the past and say, okay, what happened? Because in the West, in Europe, what happened, for example, in this European spring with Milosevic is something which was very deep in the way they were using the social network. This spring that removed Milosevic was something which was a philosophy coming from and studied and by people being trained, and one that you don't maybe heard about him, you didn't hear about him, that I'm mentioning in the book is called Srdja Popovic. Srdja Popovic came with a philosophy of mass demonstrations and a philosophy of how do we go for non-violent demonstration. If you look at the features, 50 points, all the features are in the Tunisian, in the Egyptian, it's all there. And he trained bloggers and cyber dissidents himself. And he acknowledged this. I had a debate with him on Dubai TV, say, I don't care about the ideology of the people. I was training them to use the instruments and the means. Which is, okay, that's okay. But to tell us now that it came without us knowing, even Mubarak knew in 2008, and he put in jail people coming from the United States being trained in Washington. He put them in jail in 2008. The American ambassador in 2008 sent a note to the State Department saying there are young people and bloggers that want to get rid of Mubarak before September 2011. This was in 2008, 3 years before we heard about something that was happening. So I think we have to stop being naive. But for example, something that was not expected at all is the people taking into the street in Syria. For 8 months, the Obama administration and the European administrations asked Bashar al-Assad to reform his regime from within. And then they got the message coming from the streets, we are not going to accept him to stay. And they were looking for opposition and people they can trust. Why? Because the leading force in the opposition in Syria was the Muslim Brotherhood and leftists. And the leftists are very much against the American ideology. So they try to find, and now they have started to get some people with whom they can work, even though the Syrian opposition is very divided. So I think that the first is to work on terminology, what are we talking about here, and then to come to the facts, to understand that there was a push towards democracy that was coming from within, because the people didn't want the dictator, didn't want corruption, that's clear, but at the same time there was a push, a strategy there. And this is where the people And all of us, we are wrong, and this is what I'm studying case per case. I took all the countries, starting with Iran, because the first country where we had this was Iran, in fact. And all the countries, even Bahrain, because we covered a lot Tunisia in Egypt, but not many things were said about Bahrain. And you know why? Because the petromonarchies are very much our allies. So that's fine if they are not so Democrats, as long as they protect our interests. Even though they are Islamists, by the way. You know, Islamists and capitalists are the right allies of the West. When they are both, that's okay. They are protecting our oil and they are entering the global system. But this is the reality of it. And, you know, we were talking with Wolfowitz right now in this program with Farid Zakaria, and he was saying we were wrong to leave Libya to the Qatari in terms of security. Anyone who is studying the relationship between Qatar and the United States of America knows that it's a very, very strong partnership in anything which has to do with the Middle East and Libya today. So to say we were wrong to deal with them, I think that it's a bit odd, and we have to question this. Anyway, my point here is to say the second point is to I studied all these countries and saying, you know, one of the mistakes that we are making, all of us, and the media, is to focus on one dimension of the uprisings, is the political dimension. And to talk about democratization, the people want to be free, and that's all good. But what is missing in the whole discussion is the economic interest and the geostrategic interest. In fact, the whole process is clear. For the American and the European administrations to carry on supporting dictators, and the regimes that were at the end. Mubarak was old and sick, and his son not going to be trusted because he was very much going towards east. Ben Ali was sick and old, and to support the regime was problematic. Not only because the people were old, but because something that we are not studying enough in economic terms is the shift towards the East in the Middle East in economic terms, with the BRIC countries being very involved in the region. China multiplied by 7 its economic presence in the Middle East. Huge. And in less than 10 years, it's going to be the first partners in the region. It's already the first partner for many African countries. Second, India. Tremendous player, new actor in the region, having millions of immigrants in the region working in petromonarchies and other countries. Russia, not happy with the Americans, as you know, and China and Russia were very much against the American strategy in Libya, and they lost, so they don't want to lose Syria now, so this is why they are acting like this. So I think that we are facing here something which in economic terms a shift with new actors. The countries that I mentioned, add to this South Africa, add to this Indonesia, add to this Turkey. These are new actors. And these are pushing towards the East. It's not possible for the West to keep the same relationship. So if we are obsessed with politics and we think about, oh, it's all about politics, we don't get it. And geostrategically, it's also very important. Someone who is a specialist, I was having him in a panel in Chicago recently. He was saying, for the United States, the 3 main concerns they have in the Middle East are: 1 is oil, 2nd is Israel, 3rd is terrorism and security. And I think it's a good way to summarize the whole thing. And the perception, I was asked many times over the last 3 days, why do people don't like the Americans and the Arab world? I said, first, be careful. It's not as clear as this for all the people. But the general perception is that at the end of the day, the only relationship that the Americans have, or the American administrations, the successive American administrations have with the Middle East, is about interest. Protecting oil, protecting Israel, forgetting about the Arabs, and securing their own interest and their own security, in fact. So this is a perception that is there. And we cannot just deny the fact that there is a negative perception of the role of Western countries, and mainly the Americans, and the unilateral support towards Israel. But there is one point which is important here. In geostrategic terms, the shift towards the east, China, India, Indonesia, Turkey, and southern countries, will have a tremendous impact on first oil and the oil resources, but mainly also about Israel. Because the relationship between Israel and the States is very specific, historically speaking. It's not going to be the same with China. It's not going to be the same with India. They don't have the same relationship. And this means there are questions about the future. Which kind of geostrategy is going to be the reality in the Middle East? It's a huge question. It's a huge question today. And the silence coming from Israel about all these uprisings is also something which is what is going to be done. While today, something that could be a catastrophe for all the countries in the region, and for the relationship between the so-called West and the Middle East, is if there is an attack now, just before the election, with what is happening in the Arab world against Iran, which could be a catastrophe if we go that way. But it's also a way to destabilize the region, and it could be done, especially with the kind of administration that we have in Israel today. So these are questions that we have to ask. So this is where my second study or area is really much this relationship between politics, economy, and geostrategy. The third is to look at what is happening and what happened just after the uprising. And the first big trap that happened is this polarization between, in political terms, between the secularists and the Islamists. Remember, in Tunisia, in Egypt, everywhere the perception was, oh, we have secularists on one side and Islamists. And very often when I was talking to people in Tunisia, when I was talking to people in Egypt, or from Egypt, because I didn't go there, not yet. I hope one day I will be able to go, because the situation is still unsettled, with the army playing a very important role in the region and in Egypt, is that they were saying, oh, the West is portraying us with this very simplistic polarization. In fact, it's not true. It's also coming from the Muslim majority country themselves, the secularists and Islamists. And in fact, this polarization is reducing, is simplifying, and making even simplistic the reality of the political discussion in Muslim majority countries. The secularists rejecting the Islamists rejecting the secularists, and at the end, every group is justifying its presence by the opposition to the other. But as to the true political vision, what are the proposals that are coming out of their vision for the future, it's very much not addressed. So to get rid of this polarization, to get rid of this understanding, and to come also to discuss what is the Islamic reference we are talking about. And there is a crisis of authority. I'm analyzing this in the book when it comes to what the Islamic institutions are providing, which kind of Islam they are teaching, which kind of trends that we have with a new type of Sufism, the mystical trend in Islam. As I'm saying, mysticism is the heart of Islam, but it depends which kind of mysticism, because you have a kind of mysticism now which is people very sophisticated in their field, very deep in their respective field as medical doctors, as scientists, and when it comes to spirituality, very childish. It's as if they have nothing to say. They follow a leader in an emotional way. We have this type of new kind of, the new age of the spiritual dimension, which is the new age translated into something which is spiritual, emotional spirituality. Well, if you are deep about spirituality, spirituality is the way you master your emotion. To keep the emotion, but to liberate yourself from your ego. It's not to end up with something which is a very superficial emotional attraction towards a leader that is, or a guy that is telling you how to think and not to think sometimes. So I think that we have this Islamic reference in this polarization. I'm studying this and coming with the crisis that we are facing. And we have to go beyond this polarization, and this is where the last part of the book is very much about the challenges ahead. And I'm just mentioning this challenge, and it could be part of our discussion. I just want to mention them, and I will stop. The first challenge is very much about this Islamic reference. We have now Islamists, they are saying we don't want an Islamic state, we want a civil state with Islamic reference. Still, who is going to define? How are we going to get this discussion between interpretations about the Islamic reference? How are we going to institutionalize a discussion between these interpretations? Why I'm saying this? Because this is exactly what we are seeing now on the ground. The Salafi literalists saying we are the guardian of religion and we are the first to react to this attack coming from the states, which is completely wrong. Even they are ready to distort the facts just to make themselves the credible people respecting and protecting Islam in Muslim majority countries. So there is a power struggle between people of different interpretations. When you don't master diversity, it ends up with divisions. And this is what we have. So this is one field, very important, what we taught, what we teach, how we taught Islam, and how we are teaching Islam now. The second field is the nature of the state. And the nature of the state means how are we going to structure this bottom-up delegation of power. And there are principles that for me are indisputable coming from our respective philosophical, religious and political traditions even. When it comes to 6 principles, rule of law, equal citizenship, accountability, separation of power, separation of authority and universal suffrage. These are principles that are not disputable. Now, there is clearly something that we have to acknowledge. The model, the political model, is not coming from us. We cannot export a model. There is no perfect model. We have to deal with every society out of its history, collective memory, culture should find a political model because principles are universal, models are historical. So let the people decide, but they have to decide. And I wouldn't push any country to follow in the footsteps of the Western models or the Turkish models. Find your model. Why? Because I'm a Western. I live in, and as every one of us, if we are serious about true democratic principles, we all know today that we are facing a crisis in our democracies. So to say and to end the discussion by saying, differentiate between state and religion, that's fine. No dogmatic religious position on the state. Why? Because the state is a bottom-up delegation of power. This is what we want. That's fine. But we now in the West, we are facing something which is deep, which is religion is no longer there, but we have other forces that are playing exactly the same role as religions in the past, and they are undemocratic. For example, transnational corporations, multinationals, and banks. And we have now, in Europe, where I live, technocrats, we haven't voted for them. And they are taking over and they are deciding in a non-democratic way what are the economic solutions for the state to implement. This is not what we call separation of authority. It comes even here. All the crises you went through is also about economic forces pushing the state in a direction you didn't vote for. This was not your choice. It's imposed by an authority which is economic power. And when Bill Clinton, when he was the president, was saying, you know what, you think you vote, but at the end of the day, the people who have power, the true power in this society is 1%. He was right. Because we can vote, but at the end of the day, they decide without us. Who is deciding? So we can sit down and talk about religion and state. We think we have to come with a bigger discussion about state, authority, and who decides for us. So this is a deep discussion, and this is a second field which we have to deal with. The third one is about corruption. How do we deal with corruption? And this is a very important challenge. No democracy with corruption. Impossible. Transparency is a condition. The third one is about the role of the army. The fourth one, the role of the army. Still in Egypt now, behind the scene, the army is playing a very important role. And we have to be clear on that the army should be in a very specific position, not to deal with, because the army in Egypt is 60% of the economic engagement. It's economic power. So the army is also an important thing. Education. What is your educational policy? And this is what we have to ask the secularists and the Islamists, not to tell us, oh, you are one against the other. Tell us what is your vision in education. And this is why sometimes I'm dealing with people in the West, but also in Muslim majority countries, when we talk about women. I completely agree that I don't agree that there is a problem with women in Islam. I agree that there is a problem with women in Muslim majority countries, that's for sure. But when I have people coming and say, you know, it's very dangerous what is happening in the Arab world, I say, why? Because if you look in the streets, there are more and more women wearing the headscarf. I say, in fact, you assess the liberation process of women on the way they dress. Let me tell you how we should assess the liberation process. Two things that are essential. Education for all. Are they getting opportunity to get education? Yes and no. Education is empowerment. So don't tell me the way they dress. Tell me how many are going to school. Are the schools open for women? Which kind of education is provided for all? Second is the job market. The job market means financial autonomy. This is where you are empowered. So come tell me about what is your policy in education and in social justice and job opportunities. Don't tell me the way the people dress. Because we can see so many people who are dressed in Western way, completely alienated and not liberated at all. So let us come to the true discussion here. So this is a challenge in itself. And the last two that I am addressing in the book is something that we are not talking about, unfortunately. And it's good that we are here in a library and we are talking about this, is the cultural dimension. There would be no democracy, no real democracy, if we are not serious about the cultural dimension. In the very old Islamic tradition, the legal tradition, they were always talking about maslaha, which is the public interest. In fact, it's not only, you are not following your faith, and you are not a citizen if you only abide by the rule of the country. You should get a sense of belonging, a narrative. The narrative is us. Who is this us we are talking about? How are we going to get it? The language, the culture, the genius of our society, expression, arts, music, movies. We need to be serious about this. And if you go to the Arab world, it's a catastrophe. The book in Arabic, the level, the people are not reading. What is the contribution of the Arabs today to culture, arts, expression, imagination, novels? It's not there. So you can't get a well-being if you don't have a vivid culture. And this is essential. We know now in our global world, in world culture, how much culture is important. That don't tell me this is licit from an Islamic viewpoint. Tell me how I can feel good. Tell me how I can smile without having someone telling me halal, haram, lawful and lawful, as we have it in Arabic. This is, it's an essential. In fact, one of the main process of colonization is the colonizing the minds of the people. And if you feel bad with your mind and your heart, talk about democracy. At the end, anything could produce fracture. The great majority of the young people who are in the streets now in Egypt, they are mixing frustrations with rejections. They don't feel good. So we have to be serious about this. And the last is, in our world, what is going to be the economic choices? As I told you, to enter into the global economy and to accept the World Bank, IMF, to be Islamist or not, because the great majority of the Islamists today are buying this. It's a problem. Which kind of new way of dealing with the multipolar world is going to happen? In which way we have South-South relationship? In which way we are not obsessed with the West, but organizing a shift in the center of gravity of what could be economic powers for today and tomorrow? Which kind of model? Because at the end, the true question is, all of us, we should be clear on this. We need more ethics in politics and more ethics in economy. We need ethics. We need people of ethics, not dogmatic minds, not religious minds telling us you should do this and not that, but ethics meaning to decide what are the right choices. And there is one thing that we are all facing today. Nature is telling us, go ahead with politics and economy without ethics, and you are going to destroy the world. This is nature telling us that we have to come to the right things. And this is where the Muslims should come to the right questions and not ending with discussion about, Islamists against secularists and a struggle of egos and power. Thank you. These are the fields that I wanted to.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramadan. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you, and I would ask that you keep your questions very specific. Sir, right here.
There was one word that you did not use in your talk, the word tolerance. As far as we in the West, or let me be biased, have my opinion of Islam is it's a very intolerant religion. And I'd like to know why you do not permit other views in Muslim countries.
Look, first, I'm not using the concept of tolerance. I wrote another book which is called The Quest for Meaning, Developing a Philosophy of Pluralism. And I'm advocating the concept of respect. Because, in fact, if we are on an equal footing, you have the right to be, and you should tell me, I don't expect from me to be tolerated, to suffer your presence. Who am I to suffer your presence? I respect you, and there is something which is different. I can tolerate you by ignoring you, but I should respect you by knowing you. Respect is about mutual knowledge. It's not about mutual ignorance. That could be tolerance. Having said that as a position of principle, a philosophy of life, if you come to Islam and you read the scriptural sources, you can find hundreds of references talking about respecting the other, the diversity is there. So it's not Islam that is intolerant. Muslims could be intolerant. But don't take some Muslims now who are saying things by saying all the Muslims. Don't take some countries today by saying, all the Muslims are like this country. For example, if you tell me about some petromonarchies or some dictatorship, I would say not only they are not good with non-Muslims or people of other faith, they are not even good with Muslims. So we are all victims of dictatorship. What should be done is to come to a deeper education for Muslims, but don't take the few for the majority trend. Because if I was to listen to some voices in the West by reducing Christianity to what I hear, I would say Christianity is intolerant. And I can not only rely on what they are saying, but come to history, to what the Christians did when they were the allies of colonization. So all of us, the starting point of this discussion is self-criticism and humility. Self-criticism to look at what we did, and humility to be able to learn from what the people can give. This is the point. So Islam is not tolerant or intolerant. It's a religion promoting respect like Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism. Some are taking some verses to make it their truth against the others. And this is why we have to stand up.
About 6 rows back on the aisle here.
Going back to the beginning of your talk about diversity and so on, I'd like to just make one comment, is that Mitt Romney still hasn't condemned that YouTube video and its contents, which I find absolutely remarkable, and I think every American should. But I'd like to ask you about not tolerance, that's not the word I would use, I like your word respect much better, but diversity and allowing opinions. I mean, in much of the Arabic world, one could find educational materials of all sorts, newspaper articles, all from government sources, not all from government sources, which depict the most anti-Semitic, most anti-Jewish kinds of things that most of us find repugnant. And I don't find that there is a silent majority in the Arab world that feels the same way. My feeling is, and it's only a feeling, I have no proof, I have nothing else to base it on, But I feel that there is support and an agreement with that. And I find that there is very little condemnation of that kind of material. Here in America...
Sir, can you ask your specific question? Because we have a lot of others now.
My specific question is, could you comment on that issue?
My comment is a full agreement of what you are saying. It's true. It's true that today, if you have to assess what is happening in Muslim-majority countries and the Arab world, there is a complete confusion between dealing with Judaism and dealing with the State of Israel. And because we are not happy with the Israeli policy, we accept things that are in fact anti-Semitic in the discourse. I wrote an article in 2001 talking about anti-Semitism within the Muslim-majority countries and the Muslim communities by saying never we should accept anything which has a reference to anti-Semitism, and we should be clear, anti-Semitism is anti-Islamic. Now, to be critical towards states is another point. To be critical towards, as I'm saying, I'm very critical towards very, very Muslim-majority governments. Saudi Arabia, for example, when I cannot go, it doesn't mean that I'm Islamophobe. I'm just against the state. And this is a very fair point that you are making. We really have to come to something which is differentiating between the criticism that we can have with the state and anti-Semitism. And today, the sentiment that we have in Muslim-majority countries is accepting something which is not clear. And we have to be clear on it. I'm trying, with many others, by the way, many are having this, but it's true that we are facing a sentiment that is also used by populists, religious populists, and we have to face them.
Thank you. Well, there was a lady who had her hand up here. It looks like it's gone now. If you want to go to the gentleman right there, and then Pat, come down a few rows. You folks who are recording this, please turn off your video cameras. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think that the number one thing that causes what you were describing, that the arts and culture isn't flourishing in the Arab world today, the suppression of women, economies aren't thriving. I think that theocracy is the number one reason for that. And you caution against using models, but don't you think that one Western model that came out of the Enlightenment, the one Western model that came out of the Enlightenment, the separation of church and state, isn't that worth applying and learning from in the Arab world?
No. First, the starting point of it could be, of course, that this relationship between state and religion could be one of the factors that is not promoting arts and imagination. Unfortunately, if you look at the people who are not mixing religion and state, like, for example, Saddam Hussein, like, for example, Bashar al-Assad, these are called secular leaders. Nothing is coming out of it. The question is not the relationship with state and religion. The question is the nature of the state and the priorities in policies. So whatever you can have, it's not there. Now, do we have... So I would promote something which is to be clear on the 6 principles that I mentioned as to the relationship between the two authorities. But it's a question of policies and priorities. The second point that you are making is to take from the West models. Of course, we have to study, and we can take from other society things that are working. But at the end of the day, it is not going to work if you are not reconciling the people with their narrative, with their culture, their history, and their memory and their genius. This is not, you can't export models. It has to come from within. So this is why I'm saying, at the same time, we can take from the West what is good, and also being critical about some of the weaknesses that we can see in our democracies today, which is important. You know, I have a problem with the kind of culture we are promoting around the world. When I go to Africa, I am not happy to drink Coca-Cola, to tell you the truth. I'm not happy to see everywhere McDonald's. From an ethical viewpoint, when people are talking about fast food, I have a problem. Because for me, fast food is in itself ethically a problem. I don't see it as possible to eat quickly. No, you get my point? In cultural term, it means something deep. But I'm in the minority in the Muslim majority countries today. Because if they can eat, very often they eat quickly.
Okay, there's a lady about 8 rows back in black there, and then we'll go to this gentleman in the second row.
Dr. Ramadan, I am a Catholic, and I long for the day that you talk about, that I hope comes quickly, when we can build a bridge between the Muslim world and the Western world. But this is the problem I have. Since 9/11, we have heard over and over and over that Islam is a peaceful religion. And yet this week we have 4 dead Americans, 11 countries that are having various demonstrations against America. I understand that not every Muslim we see, obviously, in these attacks is representative. But in a world of over 1 billion Muslims, why can't we find a couple of 100 million who would be willing to stand up and say that this violence against the West is wrong?
That's a good question, even though I think that if you listen beyond the headlines to voices coming from the Muslim majority countries, you have lots of people who are condemning, lots of people who are not, who are against it. Now, there is a problem here, which is, the sentiment that the West is colonizing and rejecting Islam makes it difficult for some people to react to this, because they could be perceived within the Muslim majority countries as the supporter of the West. I'm dealing with a very... You are talking about the controversies. For many Westerners and Western administration, I'm too much a Muslim. But when I deal with Muslims, they think I'm too much a Westerner because I'm critical. You should get not only the principles, you should get the emotional factor that sometimes are putting people in a situation where they are not going to talk, not to be perceived, playing with the other. It means that we should not expect this coming from the ordinary people. It should come from intellectuals, it should come from scholars, it should come from people who are equipped to be self-critical and at the same time open. And if you come to your society here, you will find in the United States of America, and get it right, in the States, as well as in Denmark or in the Netherlands, where the people are living with you. Have you seen people doing this? No. So there is hope for us here to build the bridges. But if you deal with your people through the prism of what is happening there, you will project onto the people what is happening there and not being able to speak with your people here, while we should do exactly the opposite. So I think that this is where it's important, and to avoid any kind of monolithic judgment. When, for example, people, what they would tell you in the Arab world, in the Muslim majority countries, say, you are telling us that you are working for civilization? You, the Americans? Look at what you are doing in Iraq. Look at how you are silent in Syria. Look at what happened in Afghanistan. Look at Guantanamo. They will take many things just to say exactly the opposite. So you are mirroring this, very reductive perception of the other. While, for example, we should say that in the United States of America, millions of citizens are not buying what the government is doing with, civilians. That's not the reality of the United States of America. And I think that this is where we have the moral obligation to come together and to go beyond these perceptions. If not, we are self-nurturing the whole process.
We have time for a couple more questions. Gentleman in the front row here, and then we'll move
Thank you
back
for
there.
your great presentation. Let me first say I am from the Netherlands. I came here 30 years ago, and I like this country. I'm not saying it's the greatest nation on earth, but it's an interesting country. I'd like to raise one issue with you. You brought it up. I think the biggest issue we have to solve these problems, if you can, is education and information. I think here in the United States, wherever you are, nobody is prepared and informed to have a proper discussion about these issues because they're not educated. I'm not saying I'm the best educated, but I can remember one thing when I grew up in Holland. I had to learn about how the Soviet system worked, including how the US system worked. I had to learn about the different religions. How can you have a discussion about another religion if you really don't understand that religion? You don't even understand your own religion. Well, let's not forget, this country was founded by Protestants coming from Europe who were probably very intolerant, actually, towards other religions. So I'm saying, I don't know how we get there. We talk a lot about education, but we really need more and deeper and broader education. I don't see that coming very soon.
Let me just add something about this. In the book, The Quest for Meaning, I allocated one chapter on education. And I'm advocating exactly the same. In fact, if you go throughout our educational systems, very often we have a double problem. The first is that, as you are saying, we don't study enough. A philosophy of pluralism that has to be taught means that we have to deal with other histories, other civilizations, other frame of references that we don't have, unfortunately, in our education. But you know what is deeper than that even? That I realize that, as a Westerner European, as when I'm dealing with American people, when I'm dealing with Europeans, one of the main problems I have as someone who now, after all these years, get a sense of who I can be, that I'm dealing with people who don't even know about their own history and their own values. So ignorant of the self makes you impossibly open to the others. And I think that we have to reassess history and knowledge of the others. So it's two things that we have to add, because there is really a lack of this very deep conscience of who we are. To feel good with our own history doesn't mean that we are accepting everything, but at least to know about this. I think I completely agree with the fact that education, and not education like this in a theoretical term, but the substance of what we are teaching, it's essential.
There's a gentleman in orange there, and then there's a fella halfway back, and there's a lady in the middle that we'll end with.
First, thank you for the excellent presentation. Just building on the last couple of points, if we were a different audience, let's say we were Tunisian, how similar or different would your presentation be?
It's interesting because, as it was said, in the Francophone world, I have been attacked by people saying he has a double talk. So very nice words when he talked to people of other faiths, and very, very extremist views. And I have been asking the people, can you just show me on my website? My website is open for all. How come I am? To have a double talk on my website means that the people who are reading me should have a double understanding. Because everything is open. Everything. You can't have this now. And when I'm talking in Arabic or in French or in English, it's everywhere. It was even funny because the foreign administration in Britain, they called me once and they say, you know what the French are telling me? I say, what? Say, you have a double talk. You don't speak the same in English and in French. Okay, now it's coming between French. It's not Arabic and French, but because the British didn't have the same attitude towards. So I would say that this is where I am in the whole process. I wouldn't have enemies on both sides if I have a double talk. I cannot enter still, petromonarchies, and I can't go there because I have been critical for almost 20 years. Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, petromonarchies, and up to now Syria. I wasn't able to enter. So these are the people that I'm criticizing. On the other side, I was banned from the States, banned from France, and I had some issues in the Netherlands. So it means that I want to be critical on both sides. If you come to the talk that I'm, just what I said now, read the Quest for Meaning or read Radical Reform, you will see that I'm very, very tough with my fellow Muslims on the lack of understanding of the richness of their own tradition. So I make it as a principle. Everything that I'm saying here would be nothing if at one point the substance of what I'm saying would be different. The substance should be the same. Now your references are going to be different. The point is, of course, when you talk to Muslims, you can take things coming from the Quran, coming things from the tradition, because you are talking to Muslims, they can understand. But the substance should be the same. And when I'm dealing with philosophers and Western philosophers, it's the same. So it's a very important question here. But it means that the people who are listening to me, instead of being passive and thinking that I may have a double talk, they have to look for the substance of what I'm saying in different settings, and you will see it's always the same. And my answer to many people who are saying you have a double speech or a double talk, it might be that they have a double hearing. And it's not a joke. It's not a joke. In psychological terms, we know that depending on your emotion, some information are caught and kept in your mind, and others you don't even hear them because it's not in your, system. Exactly, filter.
The fellow with the mic, and then there's a lady in front of him.
Dr. Ramadan, thank you for coming today. I want to return to your assertion about the power of terms. Hi, everyone. And I'm curious to know, to what extent is there an Arab Spring, Arab awakening, regional discourse among peoples within the Muslim majority countries? Is there a perceived unity of purpose or intention among these populations? And if so, how is that disseminated? Is it from Western-trained bloggers, Al Jazeera, and sort of what? How real is the perceived unity of the Arab awakening?
Yeah. Once again, I think that if you want to come to the substance of this, in the book you will find the way I deconstruct the whole thing. I'm not talking about spring, I'm not talking about the revolutions, but there is something which is clearly there, which is why I speak about this intellectual revolution and this awakening. There is something that still, even though in Tunisia we have something which is very nationalistic. Tunisians are dealing with Tunisia, Egyptians with Egypt. It's not very transnational. So the spring is country per country. But there is something which is transnational. For the first time in recent, in this century, in the previous century, the Arabs are getting a sense that they can get rid of dictators. So it's a shift in the mindset, this intellectual revolution, that we can do it, we can change. There is hope in the whole process. I think so far what is common to all these countries is this. Now, knowing where we are heading, what could be done, it's not yet there. So I can feel this sense of proud that we can do it, but beyond this, real political revolution, transnational movement is not there.
Hi. I guess the final question, just to shift gears a little bit. Early in the beginning of your talk, you were talking about how all the factors were there for these awakenings in the Arab world. And I may have misunderstood you, but I find it very easy for us to sit here right now looking back and very comfortably say, like, oh, of course that was going to happen.
Of course what?
Of course these awakenings or these uprisings were going to occur. But I guess my question is that actually, can you speak a little bit more to how, is that actually, you find a lot of other scholars, I guess, saying things like, there was no way you could have predicted these things. And so if you could speak a little bit more to perhaps how you believe that these things were, you could have spotted these things prior, especially in countries like Tunisia, which I feel like is a bit of a unique situation in the Arab world. Are you following me a little bit?
I think so. I hope so. If I'm not, just catch me and bring me back. Look, it's always quite interesting when you deal with the countries, because every country you deal with, or the activists that you meet, they are saying, our country is quite specific. Tunisia is specific. You look at the Egyptian, it's very specific because it's critical. And at the end, if you look at what happened and the facts, it's clear that it's a mixture of things that were happening before. Even, I'm mentioning the fact that Tunisian bloggers were trained and they were pushing towards this. It doesn't mean that there were no trade unions working on the ground much before and trying to mobilize the people. But you and me, there is something that you cannot deny. There was a shift in the nature of the mobilization that were at the end successful. All the trade unions, for decades, they were having, they were working on the ground. Some were repressed, tortured. They were not able to mobilize the people. What made it possible to mobilize beyond the political affiliation? So it's something which was very clear. The slogans, the vision is Ben Ali is a dictator, we have to get rid of him. الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام, it's dégage in French. That what was said. It's very clear. This is it. So it's beyond. So the Islamists, the secularists, the trade unions, and all this, they were all together with this message. So there is a change in the nature of the mobilization, which was not political, which was against the dictator. This is coming from a philosophy that was there, and the people were also trained to do this by not falling into the trap of divisions, coming with discipline, non-violence, and being in the streets. These are things that we know. Not only this, it's even more worrying when you go to some of the information that we can get from WikiLeaks and what also was said by the French, because this is something also which is important, is to read what the French are saying about the American involvement in Tunisia. But they are saying, for example, that Ben Ali fall into a trap, that the decision for Ben Ali to leave the country was taken by the foreign minister, by the army commandant, and the one who is now the chief of the CIA, Petraeus, was involved in this decision. In fact, he wanted to go to secure his family and to come back, and he fall into the trap. He wanted first to go to France. What is said by the French is Hillary Clinton intervened for him to end up in Riyadh. And there is something right in this. If you think today that a dictator could end up in Riyadh without the decision of Washington, I think we don't know the relationship between Riyadh and Washington. So I think that with all this, without a conspiracy mind, just to look at all these complex factors, what was coming from abroad, in what way it was pushed, why, for economic reasons and for geostrategy, and at the same time, the very clear involvement of these young generations of people who were very much against the dictator, and they wanted to get rid of this. They added a quality to the mobilization that was not there before. Neither from the secularists nor from the Islamists. They were not successful. For generations, they were not successful. So I would say that this is where it's not to look at what happened and to say, oh, it could have been predicted. I'm not saying this. I'm just asking the people to be cautiously assessing the situation and not thinking that everything came from the people, even though the final success is coming from the energy and the courage of the people in the streets. And this is not to be denied, and this is to be celebrated, but without naivety. Naivety is very dangerous in the whole process. This is what I'm saying.